Hello there dear viewer. Today I have a big stack of Warner Archive collection titles on Blu-ray to talk about. If you don't know about Warner Archive, they're a great Blu-ray label that is part of the Warner Brothers group, and they release so many great films on Blu-ray, like classic Hollywood cinema, great Technicolor musicals, there's a load of B-movie stuff, horror, loads of animation, and you'll see in this video, amongst all of these titles, there is such a wide range of brilliant things that they are bringing to physical media. You may have seen in a recent video of mine that I talked about their very first 4K release, which is John Ford's The Searchers, which I'm not going to talk too much about here. Go back and watch my video, but it's a fantastic first 4K release from them. Anyway, there's a lot here to talk about. Time is of the essence, so I'm going to keep it brief on each one of these titles, but please, if you want to know more about any specific title here, feel free to get in touch with me, leave a comment down in this video, and I will answer any questions you have. Before I start, one question that always comes up is, are these Region A locked? Because they are US discs, so they're made in America. But in fact, Warner Archive do not region lock their discs as far as I know. I've never come across one that is locked. So no matter where you are in the world, you should be able to play all of these on your Blu-ray player. So first off, we have The Walking Dead, not to be confused with the very famous TV show. This is a Boris Karloff movie, which is about this man who is framed for the murder of a judge. He's framed by some gangsters, and he ends up coming back from the dead and seeking revenge on the people that framed him. And this was made in the wake of Boris Karloff becoming a bit of a star due to Frankenstein. And I think a lot of people wanted to cash in on all of that value that he's bringing to films where he is starring. I think it's a fantastic story that is elevated by the fact it's directed by Michael Curtiz, one of the very best directors that there was in the period. He would often make up to 4 or 5 films a year. He churned out so many films and made many great films, including Casablanca, for example. And one of the things that I loved about this Blu-ray is in the special features, it includes the documentary from about 10 years ago called Michael Curtiz, The Greatest Director That You've Never Heard Of. And in that documentary, there are famous filmmakers like William Friedkin and Steven Spielberg talking about their love for Michael Curtiz. So The Walking Dead, a fantastic release from Warner Archive. Next on the pile, I have A Man Called Shenandoah. This is the complete series. This is a television series, and Warner Archive have been great at unearthing these television series from the 60s. A lot of great westerns, actually. They did Colt 45. They also did The Alaskans with Roger Moore. And this is another great one. In this series, we follow this gunslinger who is like on the verge of death, but then he ends up surviving, but he doesn't know who he is. And he has to piece together, his own identity and find his place in this, strange, often violent world. I've been absolutely loving watching this TV show. I haven't watched all of it yet because I think there's about 15 hours worth of episodes here. But they look brilliant. They were scanned in 4K by the Warner team, and they're presented here on the Blu-ray. So I think this is a fantastic release if you are a fan of westerns or classic TV from the period. Then we have something else very special. We have the Thin Man collection. This is 6 films from the Thin Man series starring William Powell and Myrna Loy. And these are just great films. If you aren't familiar with these films, we follow this couple who are detectives who end up solving these murder mysteries. And there's a lot of comedy, there's a lot of thrills. And I think these films tend to balance these different elements of filmmaking perfectly. They aren't quite completely comedies, they aren't quite completely murder mystery thrillers. They manage to do everything and just make it all work, especially the very first film, which I think is the best film. They do kind of decrease in enjoyment over the course of the series, but I still had a great time with all of them. And this is great value. You get 6 films in here. They're all presented in the case like this, and these are all available separately from Warner Archive as well. So if you just wanted to get the first one and the second one, or whichever, you can get all of these separately. Then we come to Nora Prentiss, starring Ann Sheridan, directed by Vincent Sherman. This was one that, to be honest with you, on first time watching it, it didn't completely grab me. It's one of those films that kind of sagged a bit in the middle, and I found myself kind of losing interest, but maybe I was watching it at a bad time. It's a film about a doctor who fakes his own death and he ends up running away and he falls in love with this singer. And it has so many like twists and turns and is very much done in the film noir style. However, there are elements in this film that I greatly enjoyed, particularly the cinematography from the great cinematographer James Wong Howe, who was one of the very best during this period. And if you're a fan of the great many films that he shot that look stunning, like The Sweet Smell of Success, for example, then this is probably worth checking out because it has his great cinematography in here. Leaving black and white behind, we have something in stunning Technicolor. It's The Spanish Main. This is directed by Frank Borzage, and this is a swashbuckling kind of story which has the unlikely casting of Paul Henreid in the leading role as the charismatic swashbuckler. And it is strange seeing him in this heroic role because I'm used to seeing him in Casablanca as the villainous Nazi. But nevertheless, it does work. And the film is stunning. And this is a perfect Saturday afternoon watch for me. It's one of those where it's kind of cozy. There's nothing too extreme, graphic, depressing in this film. It's all a bit of a romp. And sometimes you just need that kind of film. Frank Borzage made a number of great films during this period. So this one absolutely fit the bill when I needed it the most. I spoke about the great animated releases that Warner Archive put out, and this one is fantastic. This is the Looney Tunes Collector's Choice Volumes 1 to 4. And just like the Thin Man release that I showed you previously, this is collecting the latest Looney Tunes collection and then the previous 3 in the same case. So you'll find them all inside here, just like this. I imagine you don't need me to explain to you what the Looney Tunes cartoons are. They are essentially some of the best animated short films ever made, and many of these are timeless. Some of them are a bit dated in their approach to certain things, let's not make a mistake about that, but many of these are just so easy to watch and so fun, and brilliant storytelling for people of all ages. Basically, you get 97 of the cartoons here, which is over 10 hours worth of Looney Tunes. So I think this is a great release. I'm so glad that Warner are taking the time to put these out on Blu-ray, and hopefully there will be more volumes in the future. Sticking with animation now, we have one of the Hanna-Barbera double feature packs. It's a Johnny Quest one with Johnny's Golden Quest and Johnny Quest versus the Cyber Insects. Now these two films are nostalgic for me because I remember when I was a boy in the 1990s, over here in the UK, we would have the Johnny Quest reboot series and these feature films shown on Cartoon Network. So it was a real joy for me rediscovering these films. And I'm so glad that they're putting these out, and the Scooby-Doo films, which I've been loving. And I admit that if you have never watched Johnny Quest and you've never seen these films, it might not do all that much for you. And that's absolutely fine. If you're a fan of the series and if you grew up on it like I did, then this was a real trip down memory lane. Then we have the fantastic The Tall Target from Anthony Mann, one of the greatest directors of American cinema, if you ask me. He made some of the best westerns, he made some of the best noir films, thrillers, and in this film it's kind of bringing a lot of those things together because this is a period film set during the life of Abraham Lincoln, where we follow this police officer who is on a train and he believes that someone is planning to assassinate Lincoln as he is on his way to Washington, D.C. for his inauguration. And this is so thrilling and so noirish, and it's mostly set on a train, which is something I love. I think trains are just so cinematic, and it's so well directed. Anthony Mann knows exactly where to place the camera, whether it's a scene where someone has a gun behind their back, or whether it's a scene where someone is perhaps going to get run over by a train. He knows exactly how to shoot those scenes, and this is a fantastic film. It looks beautiful on the disc as well. I'm so happy the Warner Archive released this one. Then we come to something that I don't usually expect from Warner Archive, but it's a great surprise to see this kind of film being released by them. It's this one, which is called The Night Full of Rain, or the full title is actually The End of the World in Our Usual Bed in a Night Full of Rain. This is from director Lina Wertmuller, starring Giancarlo Giannini and Candice Bergen, in what is essentially a portrait of this very strange relationship, quite a toxic relationship, kind of in the style of something like Scenes of a Marriage. It's looking at the miscommunications between these two people, the breakdown of a relationship, and how actually they kind of need each other It's a very complicated film, and this is from a director who is quite provocative in their work. And this is maybe actually one of the less provocative films from the filmmaker. It's not the easiest of films to watch, but there's a lot to chew on if you want to stick with this film. It's looking at these two different characters. You know, she is an American feminist, he is an Italian communist, and together they clash, and they come from totally different backgrounds with different beliefs. And while on first watch I'm not in love with this film, I definitely had a great experience watching it, so it's one that I'm going to have to revisit again. But there was a lot in here that I did enjoy. Then going back to classic B-movie cinema, we have The Return of Dr. X. This is from 1939, directed by Vincent Sherman. Again, I mentioned him earlier. And this is a sequel to the Dr. X film that was made by Michael Curtiz. And I don't think this sequel works as well as the original, but it's very notable because this is the only horror film that starred Humphrey Bogart. And here he's playing this slimy looking guy who's come back from the dead, and it's very unlike anything you've ever seen from him before because he never did anything like this ever again. This was before he was a big name, so it's quite interesting to go back and see the kind of films he was doing before he fully broke out and became the guy that we know from films like Casablanca. It's a fun film. There's some interesting things going on here. It's not amazing, but I enjoyed my time with it, and it made me want to go back and rewatch the original. Then we come to a horror B-movie from the 1940s. It's The Beast with Five Fingers, and this is kind of a crazy story about this guy who's on death's door. He's a pianist, and when he ends up dying, one of his hands that's been severed ends up coming to life and starts killing people, and that is The Beast with Five Fingers. It's entertaining, it's not amazing, but I like the gothic atmosphere, and it was fun to see how all of these people would die in these very interesting ways. So again, one of those films that I don't think anyone here is calling a masterpiece, but one of those that I just had a fun time with. Then we come to Mr. Lucky with Cary Grant and Lorraine Day. This is an interesting Cary Grant film. I don't think it's one of his strongest, and it was made in 1943, I think it was, so during the wartime, and there's a lot of kind of wartime heroism in this story. Even though he plays a scoundrel, a swindler, he's trying to con people, but he ends up falling in love. It's very typical Cary Grant, but for whatever reason I just don't think it kind of comes together like, you know, the great heights that he achieved in all of those great screwball comedies. But nevertheless, it's one that I want in my collection because I'm a big fan of Mr. Cary Grant, and even some of his lesser performances are ones that I can find a lot to enjoy. I also got the film Sweethearts. This is directed by W.S. Van Dyke, who directed the first Thin Man film, so there's a connection there. And this is a beautiful Technicolor film about these two theatre performers who have had this tremendous success over the course of 6 or 7 years, and then they get called to come to Hollywood. However, obviously the people around these two actors don't want the show to end, so they are trying to stop these two going to Hollywood because they don't want the gravy train to stop. There's singing and there's dancing, and there's a charm to this film, but I didn't completely like it. I can't quite put my finger on why this didn't work, and I know that's not very helpful in this recommendation, but nevertheless the Technicolor imagery was beautiful. This next one is a film that I'm so glad got a release from Warner Archive. It's For Your Consideration, the film from Christopher Guest. I love his movies. Waiting for Guffman is one of my all-time favourites. Obviously I love Spinal Tap, I love Best in Show, Mighty Wind, I like Mascots. So if you like that style of film, then this is one to definitely check out because it's got a great cast. So many people pop up in this film and you're like, oh my god, it's that person. I don't want to spoil the surprise though. It's about this film that's being made in Hollywood, and during the production, all of the cast members start to think that there is Oscar buzz around them. So they're waiting for the Oscar nominations to be revealed. And it's all about the kind of neurotic lives that these actors live. And just seeing the interaction between these characters, it's just amazing. Something that's different in this film is he's leaving behind the mockumentary style of filmmaking. However, it still half feels like a mockumentary, but it would have perhaps made more sense if we were following a documentary crew going behind the scenes of this movie and interviewing all the people. That's a tiny aside. I still think this is a great work. Not as good as Waiting for Guffman, but I still very much enjoyed it. And then we have Black Eye from the 1970s, which is sort of a blaxploitation film, sort of harkening back to film noir of the 1940s, directed by Jack Arnold, who I mainly know from making 1950s science fiction features like The Incredible Shrinking Man. But here he's put together a great detective story with some great location shooting in Los Angeles. So I had a great time with this, and I know I've said that with basically every release, but Warner Archive genuinely do present so many surprises to me. Films that I didn't even know existed, they weren't on my radar, and then films like Black Eye come along, and I have a great time watching it. So hopefully you can take some of these recommendations, whether that's to buy right now or you wait for a future sale, but there's so much in their catalogue. I've only really been collecting Warner Archives in the past year or two, and I need to go back and really go into their catalogue and pick out so many classics that I've missed. So hopefully I get the chance to do that over the next few years. But there's so much to discover. There is never a boring day when you have some Warner Archive titles in your collection. Again, if you want to know anything more about those titles, then please just leave me a comment and I'll get back to you about those. Click the video on screen right now if you'd like some more reviews and recommendations from me. Until next time, thanks very much for watching, and I'll see you soon.